folks in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Learning and Mending Bison and Range. As we are all getting into our squares for the evening, I just want to start out with our embroidery of the week. And this week we are featuring Drea Martinez, and she has finished the Underground Nematoid and Friends, and it is
Wow.
absolutely incredible how this one just jumps off the fabric. I mean, every detail, the color, the
Wow.
vibration, it's outstanding.
Yeah.
So this is our embroidery of the week. And again, as we're waiting for everybody to get settled in, we're just going to start right now with introductions of who we are, where we're calling in, our pronouns, and what we're working on this evening. So I will start. I'm Jen, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm zooming in from Studio City, and I am actually working on the Bison embroidery, and it's coming along slowly but surely. So I will pass this on to Walker.
There I am. Hi, everyone. I'm Walker. I'm here in Baja, California, in Kumeyaay land. And I use she, they pronouns. And I'm working on this kind of mess of microbes.
Woo! Beautiful.
And I'm going to pass it to Kavi.
Walker. Hi, everyone. Kavi calling in from Sacramento, California, using he, him pronouns. Really looking forward to hearing all your wonderful voices. I missed out on last week. Had a trip to the Sequoias. Was really enjoyed that, but also missed you all here. I'll pass it over to Tori.
Hi, I'm driving. I'm on unceded Hohokam land and use they, them pronouns. And I'm not working on any
Your destination is on the right.
I'm not working on any mending needlework, but absolutely working on spiritual mending.
Mm-hmm.
Since I'm driving, I can't see who I would pass it to.
No
problem. I'll jump in. Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren. I use she, they pronouns. I am calling in from Metabolic Studio on Tongva Gabrielino land by the Los Angeles River, and I am working on one of these celly things. And happy to be here tonight, and I will pass it on to my friend Nick.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you. I'm Nick, and very late in the game, I'm dropping in this last session, and I'm pleased to see you all. I use he, him, they pronouns, and I haven't been working on anything in relation to this work that you've all been doing, but I have been spending the day looking at maps of North America. And I'm in Chicago, Illinois. Sorry. Thank you.
And then popcorn it to someone else, Nick.
And I will like to send this on to Jasmine.
Hello. My name is Jasmine. I use she, her pronouns. I'm zooming in from Duck, North Carolina today, this evening. And I'm not working on the needlepoint this evening. I'll be reading along. And I will pass it to Ansu.
everyone. I'm calling in from Eagle Rock and Northeast LA, and I go by she, her pronouns. And I'm sorry to have missed, I think, a couple weeks, but I'm really happy to be here. And I'm going to pass it on to Olan.
Thank you, Ansu. Yes, I'm Olan. I'm in West Hollywood. I use she, her pronouns. I'm working on the mycelium carbon exchange.
Woo!
Still getting there, getting there. And I will pass it along to Susan.
Thank you. I'm Susan. I'm in Hollywood as well. And I am slowly but surely making progress, but not great progress, but making progress. And really have enjoyed the series. So looking forward to it tonight. Thank you. And I will pass it to Douglas. Did you go yet, Douglas?
Douglas Lee. I'm calling in from the Metabolic Studio. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm very glad to be here this evening. And I will pass it on to, let me put on gallery view because I can't.
I'll take it.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Doug, and welcome everybody again to Learning and Mending. Since the pandemic began, Metabolic Studio has moved our weekly open studio practice to Zoom. In this 8th series of Learning and Mending, Bison and Range, we looked at the grassland ecozone that spans more than 180 million acres, stretching across the center of North American continent from the northern tip to the wetlands that flow into the oceans, and how this vast network of biologically diverse landscapes has been radically re-terraformed by the ideologies of manifest destiny, extractivism, capitalism, monoculture farming, and the colonization of the commons of soil, water, and seed. To honor the bison, we have added a new embroidery designed by Michelle Briard that we're happy to add to our collection. If you'd like one of these or another one of the patterns we have to offer, please send your email with please send us an email with your mailing address to info@metabolicstudio.org. In this series, we explore the story of this landscape, commonly referred to as the Great Plains, and the symbiotic relationship that bison herds shared with our ecosystem over millennia, before nearly being exterminated by European settlers. The First Nations of this continent are still deeply connected with the epistemological interdependent web of life, and in this series, we will learn about the contemporary movement led by Indigenous people and their allies to bring the bison back to their range, while confronting systematic colonization in its past and present forms. In this time of spring renewal, we come together to celebrate the deep knowledge of the herd, the biodiverse prairies of our continent, Indigenous wisdom, and the peoplehood, and continue to explore the systematic changes that are urgently needed for a more just and ecologically sane future. Tonight, Olan Jones, Director of Overtone Industries, will conduct our participatory Zoom choir with sound artist Douglas Lee. They will direct us in a virtual choir through the silo we work with on the western boundary of the Great Basin. This 6-week series is curated and led by Kelly Skye, an ecologist, artist, and PhD candidate at UC Santa Cruz. We will share our screen displaying this week's reading. Feel free to jump in and read aloud from the text as you feel inspired, as we welcome one and all to both listen and giving voice to the unique texts we share each week. And I just wanted to make an announcement that before I pass this on to Kelly, and she will give a quick synopsis of tonight, I wanted to let you all know that while this is our last Learning and Mending Bison and Range, we will be resuming this series Thursday, September 15th, and our focus will be on post-human infrastructure. So watch your email in the coming months. This summer, we'll be sending an announcement, and you can continue working on your embroidery. If you didn't finish it tonight, no pressure. You've got all summer and to continue on in our next one. So I will now pass it over to you, Kelly.
Nice. I love it. Post-human infrastructure. Hi, everybody. Well, I just, want to first of all just say thank you all for participating in this series. It's a really complex, challenging, and deeply important topic. And so I appreciate all of your presence. And I also wanted to directly thank Metabolic Studio and Lauren for creating this unique space that we have been able to share together. I think of it kind of like a radical pedagogy, or it's like an alternative learning network that is being created in this space. And coming from academics, I really value these kind of alternative formats. There's something that they bring, and especially when they're filled with a lot of creativity and caring. Like, I feel like this group really is like driven by a deep heart care. I don't know how else to say it, but so anyway, I want to thank you all, and thank Metabolic Studio just to begin. But yeah, so tonight, our final installation, or our final night, it was hard for me to pick what to do and what to read because there's so much more and so many things, but I'm hoping we can kind of connect what we read last week about the deep past and connect it into the future, because we're now in this moment with the context of climate and some major challenges as a global community. So tonight we'll definitely be reading about some efforts to create resiliency across the Great Plains in the context of a changing climate and in the context of changing demographics, which is interesting across the Great Plains. I found this great article from Winona, good old Winona, again, Winona LaDuke, where she kind of offers a cautious level of hope for this trend that she has seen around the revival and expansion of indigenous peoplehood across the plains and the return of the bison herds. So it's interesting to hear her perspective on those changing trends. And we'll also read a couple excerpts from the book we've been reading from, Prairie and Natural History, again, because that book does a great job of outlining a very whole systems kind of thinking about the different species on the prairie, and different types of efforts to conserve and regenerate prairie ecosystems. And there's a couple good maps for Nicholas, the map lover. We have a couple maps to bring some. I put a couple in to try to give us a visual sense of some of these efforts and potential of the Great Plains to harbor wildlife and diverse grasslands once again. And the absolute necessity in the context of climate and other pressures like drought. So we'll hear that'll be the core of the material. But we will start off with a wonderful reading from the poet laureate Henry Reelbird, who I loved so much in this series. And I'm hoping to end with a short reading and video from Chief Arvil Lookinghorse, who is an elder and spiritual leader of the Lakota peoples. And he recounts a story of the white buffalo calf woman, which some of you may have heard this story before. It's really sacred, very ancient story, and I feel like we couldn't have this series without it. And so I feel like it's a great way to end hearing his voice directly speaking of that prophecy. So I hope we have time to fit all of it in. I did hear that there's a possibility we might have some special guests from the Texas Tribal Buffalo Project. And if that's the case, we'll see how we're doing on time, because hearing directly from people working on the ground, as we saw when we had James Holt from the Buffalo Field Campaign, is super enlightening on a whole other level. So we'll see how we do. But on that note, I'm going to be quiet now and let's dive into the readings.
The 7 buffalo bulls become the Big Dipper. At one time, a long time ago, there were some buffalo bulls known as the 7 buffalo bulls, and they were wandering around and wondering how they could be forever upon sacred Mother Earth. At first, they thought they would become a large tree to be forever. Then they thought, no, a large tree can someday die, become dry, and fall to the ground to break into many pieces. So they decided to not be a great big tree upon sacred Mother Earth. The second idea was to become a huge rock, a boulder up in the mountains, so the 7 buffalo bulls could be forever upon sacred Mother Earth. But they thought, no, a huge rock boulder would someday crumble from the elements like cold ice and wind. It would break up to become sand blowing in the wind or be carried away by a big snow runoff flood. So they decided to not become a huge rock, a boulder up in the mountains to be forever upon sacred Mother Earth. The 7 buffalo bulls' third heart's way was to become the wind so that they could be forever upon sacred Mother Earth. The wind is all over Mother Earth and truly is forever. So they were happy to become the wind. Then one buffalo bull said, but no, bad beings like the snake can breathe in the wind, and we would be inside of a snake. That would be awful, the 7 buffalo bulls thought, and they decided to not become the wind, to be forever upon sacred Mother Earth. So they again wondered what they could be to become forever upon sacred Mother Earth. This time they wanted to become the sacred fire, and they thought hard as to how it would be. Then one buffalo bull said, it would not be good because people throw bad things into the fire. And the 7 buffalo bulls also decided against being the sacred fire to be forever upon sacred Mother Earth. One last time, they thought of how they could be forever upon sacred Mother Earth. And after much thought, they decided to become the 7 stars of the Big Dipper. Also, when they went to become the Big Dipper, it is said that Iwilikulu, one of the buffalo's wolf dogs, wanted to go too, and close to one of the handle stars is the dim star he became. The 7 buffalo bulls wanted to be at the place where the Upsoloika Crow Indians point the sacred pipe to pray to help them forever upon sacred Mother Earth. So when life does not go well and the Upsoloika need help, we can smoke with the 7 buffalo bulls and ask for it. Henry Reelbird.
So, just a little interlude here. I promised this group I would share this pictograph, especially I think I was talking with Walker. I found it so provocative. There's these tales that the buffalo would actually consume humans, and they think it comes from the ancient times when the buffalo were a lot larger and a lot fiercer. And so it's just, I don't know. There was something when I saw this image about the fusion of the bison and the human, and I don't know, the reversal of roles, I guess, where we're normally eating the bison. The bison is, there was just something about it. So I just threw that in here as a little interlude before we go on to our next reading to fulfill my promise.
Should we read the caption or?
Sure, it's a little difficult to read. Here, I'll read it since it's my fault that it's so pixelated. It came from a book that I got from an archive, Buffalo Nation by Valerius Geist. So buffalo pictograph with a human inside, painted on a Dakota winter count chronicle in 1850 to 1851. These two pictographs depict bison with human figures inside of them. According to one of the artists, a buffalo cow was killed and an old woman found in her belly, as recounted by the anthropologist Garrick Mallory in 1882 to 1883. Stories of bison swallowing human beings were perpetuated through time to become legend. The tales may have had their roots in early eras when monstrous bison were said to attack and eat people.
Long-range forecast. For a long time, it has come back to us in wishes, this great prairie and these beautiful canyons. Kiowa Elder and U.S. Army Sergeant, ICO, Amarillo, Texas, 1924. In a century when the natural world is slowly dying all around us, when wildness has been pushed to the margins, the wide open spaces of the Great Plains are a landscape of hope. Here is an ecosystem that has experienced the full onslaught of modernization in one brief historical instant, and that, though battered and torn, still inspires us with its splendor. This is a country filled with light. It is a place where city streets flow out into the prairie and draw us along until almost before we know it, we find ourselves rolling down a dusty gravel road with warm gusts of meadowlark song blowing in through the open window. It is a land where the seasons surge over us like tides. From the sudden upswelling of spring to the languid heat of summer, and from the rushing retreat of autumn to the great sparkling silence of winter. Look up into the darkness of a prairie night and you will see the universe streaming with stars. Suddenly, it becomes possible to picture yourself on the third planet out from the sun, traveling through the mystery and wonder of whatever is out there. The prairie opens us to the immensities of space and time. Like few other places on Earth, it reminds us that life operates within broad horizons, with sight lines that extend from the past through the present and into the future. Just as the buffalo prairie is gone, though not forgotten, the countryside that we see before us is even now being transformed into the living landscape of tomorrow. As we look at the world that we have inherited from our ancestors, it is impossible not to think of the generations who will come after us. The wild prairie that we leave to them will be our legacy. Admittedly, the trends of recent decades have not been encouraging. Although the big plow down of the settlement era is behind us, native prairie is still being lost year by year and bit by bit, whether to cropland, wind farms, strip malls, or rural subdivisions. According to one recent assessment, about 425,000 square miles of natural grassland have been destroyed in the western United States in the last 150 years. Of these losses, almost 10%, 42,000 square miles, an area nearly half the size of Wyoming, were incurred between 1950 and 1990. Although the rate of conversion has slowed in recent decades, the destruction has not stopped. We can rip up 10,000-year-old grasslands in an instant, but it is beyond our powers to create it. Almost as worrying as the outright disappearance of native prairie is the degradation of what is left, whether through overgrazing, fragmentation by energy development, or the intrusion of invasive plants. Not surprisingly, this incremental damage, death by 1,000 cuts, is taking a toll on species that rely on wild grasslands for their survival. Take birds, for example. A study by the North American Commission for Environmental Cooperation identified 32 species of birds that are highly dependent on the Great Plains of Canada and the United States, in the sense that more than half of the population is found in the region at some time of year. This group includes not only permanent year-round residents such as prairie chickens, but also fair weather friends like sprags, pipits, and marbled godwits, which are present only during the breeding season. In addition, there is a short list of species, sandhill cranes and common mergansers among them, that crowd into the southern plains during the winter. By analyzing data from the Breeding Bird Survey, a standardized count conducted each year since 1966 in both Canada and the United States, the CEC determined that more than 60% of the species that rely on the Great Plains are declining in abundance. In contrast, 23% of woodland species and about 28% of all bird species in North America are experiencing losses.
Another recent study focused exclusively on birds that depend on dry prairie uplands. Swainson's hawks, killdeers, meadowlarks, bobolinks, long-billed curlews, and the like. Of the 36 species under construction, all but 5 were found to be in decline. What are these prairie canaries trying to tell us about the state of our grassland ecosystems? And if prairie birds are suffering, what confidence can we have that the other critters out there, the rodents and creepy crawlies, say, that inspired less interest, are managing any better? The Western Advantage. By now, you may be wondering what happened to the landscape of hope that you were promised a few minutes ago. We're lovers in a dangerous time, and preserving the splendor of the living world is a global challenge. As Bruce Cockburn's lyrics remind us, nothing worth having comes without some kind of fight. Yes, the trends are disheartening. Yes, the risks are real, but so is the potential for renewal. In spite of everything, native grassland still persists across the Great Plains, whether as isolated remnants in the Corn Belt or as vast sweeps of rangeland in the western provinces and states. And even though many of the prairie's special creatures are under severe stress, it is encouraging to remember that every single one of them is still with us. The only known exceptions are the passenger pigeons, a bird that was driven from superabundance into oblivion by market hunting in the 19th century, and the Rocky Mountain locust, a scourge of pioneer agriculture, which is thought to have vanished around 1900. The number of important subspecies has also been lost to the past, including the prairie-adapted races of wolves, grizzly bears, bighorn sheep, each with its own genetic innovations. Any human-caused extinction is a cause for deep regret. Yet, given the intensity of development on the prairies in the last 100+ years, this record is better than anyone could have dared to hope for. It is a reminder that the grasslands and the species they support are adaptable and tough, capable of coping with blizzards, wildfires, and 100-year droughts. Within limits, they can even cope with us. Yet, natural adaptability on its own would not have been enough to bring the full complement of species through a century of crisis. Faced with rapid and violent change, several of the region's unique life forms would almost certainly have disappeared without the intervention of conservation-minded people. The survival of species like the bison stands as proof that people who love the prairie and take a stand on its behalf are the last best hope of the Wild West.
The story of environmental, gone today, here tomorrow. The story of environmental resistance on the Great Plains goes at least back to 1872 and the bloody era of the bison slaughter. In a year when 2 million bison were killed for their hides, their carcasses left to rot, a man named Samuel Walking Coyote took the exceptional step of rounding up 7 orphaned calves and driving them from the Milk River country to his home on the Flathead Reservation in western Montana. There, they and their burly descendants soon found their way into the hands of 2 local ranchers, Charles Allard and Michael Pablo, the later a reformed buffalo hunter who wanted to make amends for his involvement in the bloody bath. Over the next 20 years, as the last of the wild herds were exterminated, Pablo and Allard devoted themselves to breeding and rearing their captive stock. By 1891, the 2 men possessed around 35 head, making theirs one of the largest herds of bison in existence. The other survivors included a handful of strugglers in Yellowstone National Park, plus a couple of dozen private herds in Canada and the United States, with a combined population of 200 to 300 bison. Then in the early 1900s, a change in government regulations opened the Flathead lands to homesteading, an intrusion that Pablo and Allard were helpless to resist, and there were no longer any places for them or their bison. Was the species finally being pushed into oblivion? Faced with this bleak prospect, a group of prominent Eastern conservationists formed the American Bison Society, one of the first national environmental groups in North America in 1905. Its objective was to establish wildlife refuges, and while there was still a chance, stock them with some of the captive bison. In short order, 2 small blocks of land were acquired, the Wichita Mountains National Wildlife Refuge in Oklahoma and the National Bison Range in Montana, the latter situated on what until then had been Flathead land, a maneuver that continues to be a bone of contention. With the refugees in place, whether by fair means or foul, it was time to bring on the bison. A deal was struck with Pablo and Allard for the purchase of their herd, but Congress vetoed it as a waste of taxpayer dollars. The Bison Society then set to work collecting private donations in nickels and dimes, and ultimately they raised enough funds to purchase a few head of breeding stock. Meanwhile, news that Pablo Allard herd was for sale sped north to Banff, Alberta, where it reached the ear of a park superintendent, Howard Douglas, a conservationist who already saw a small herd of bison in Rocky Mountain, now Banff, National Park. Douglas persuaded his superiors in the Park Service to buy the Pablo Allard outfit and transport the animals to Elk Island National Park near Edmonton. Although it took 6 successive spring roundups to catch the half-wild beasts, just over 700 animals were eventually transferred across the border to relative safety.
Elk Island was supposed to be a stopover on the way to the animals' real home, the brand new Buffalo National Park near Wainwright, Alberta. About 50 of the animals managed to evade capture, however, and had to be left behind at Elk Island. The rest of the animals were duly transported to southern Alberta, where some of them were eventually crossbred with cows in an attempt to make them more amenable to domestication. Most of the bison in commercial production today carry cattle genes from this kind of misguided experiment. So too do many of the bison in Wood Buffalo National Park in northern Alberta, where the Wainwright herd, by then 6,700 strong, were transferred during World War II. The escapees at Elk Island, by contrast, are thought to bred true to their ancestral stock as 100% pure and unadulterated plains bison. Other sources of pure plains bison genetics include the herds in the Henry Mountains in Utah, Sully's Hill National Game Preserve, and Wind Cave National Park in the Dakotas, and the Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks in Wyoming. Of all the bison alive today, less than 1.5% are the real deal from a genetic point of view, and it is more by a good luck than good management that we have any at all. If there is a moral to the story, it is that prairie conservation is a high stakes, high risk undertaking, with a surprise at every bend and a constant call for new strategies and alliances. Plains bison would have not survived the last century without human help, however bumbling and misguided that help has sometimes been. The fact that the species exists today is a tribute to factions and imperfect collaboration between ranchers, city slickers, and individuals and groups, indigenous and non-indigenous people, citizens and civil servants, each group following its own bent and with a little luck thrown in at critical moments. By engaging the problem from different angles, a diverse coalition of people came up with diverse approaches that over time have permitted them to confront a series of unexpected challenges. Just as an ecosystem relies on the interplay among species, so conservation depends on the interplay among people with all their differences. These days, the big players in bison conservation are beginning to dream about boosting the recovery effort into a whole new dimension. In the mind's eyes, they can already envisage several herds of pure plains bison, each at least 1,000 animals strong, roaming wide vistas of wind-stepped grasslands. Canadian Forces Base Suffield in Alberta and the Charles M. Russell National Wildlife Refuge in Montana are among the locations that have featured in these scenarios. Ideally, these populations would be free not only of cattle genes, but also of cattle diseases like anthrax and brucellosis, yet would be subject to a full suite of predators, perhaps grizzlies and certainly wolves, and other natural evolutionary pressures. That's what it will take, the experts tell us, for plains bison to advance from mere survival towards restoration as the living, breathing embodiment of the prairie ecosystem, capable not only of restoring ecological function, but also of inspiring, sustaining, and connecting human cultures. Is this a pipe dream, or might this hopeful vision be just the spark we need to bring diverse interests together over a fresh pot of joe and get us talking to one another about the future?
The Buffalo Treaty. At gatherings held in Browning, Montana in 2014 and Banff, Alberta the following year, members of 12 Indigenous groups met to sign the Buffalo Treaty, a document that reaffirms their kinship with buffalo. Quote, "Our ongoing relationship is so close and so embodied in us," the treaty states, "that buffalo is the essence of our holistic ecocultural lifeways." By signing, the partner nations and tribes pledged to welcome buffalo to once again live among us as the Creator intended, in order to nurture each other culturally and spiritually. It is our collective intention, the text continues, to recognize buffalo as a wild, free-ranging animal, and as an important part of the ecological system, to provide a safe space and environment across our historic homelands. So together we can have our brother, the buffalo, lead us in nurturing our land, plants, and other animals to once again realize the buffalo ways for future generations. The signatories to this historic treaty include the Blackfeet, Siksika, Piikani, Stoney Nakoda, Chiniki, Bearspaw, Wesley, Samson Cree, Tsuut'ina Nations, together with the Blood Tribe, the Anishinaabe, the Gros Ventre tribes of Fort Belknap Indian Reservation, the Assiniboine and the Sioux tribes of the Fort Peck Indian Reservation, and the Salish and Kootenai tribes. Mista Wasis First Nation joined the treaty at a separate ceremony in Saskatchewan in 2017.
Meanwhile, back at the ranch, bison carry the romance of the grasslands on their broad shoulders, though it is perhaps not surprising that they continue to inspire people to take action on their behalf. But many other grassland adapted species have also benefited from human intervention. One thinks, for example, of the swift fox, a small bat-eared rodent-hunting canid that was once widely distributed across the Great Plains, but that, after settlement, became severely diminished in both population and range. Thanks in part to a captive breeding program initiated by Beryl and Miles Smeaton of the Cochrane Ecological Institute, the species has been reintroduced to an area in southeastern Alberta and southwestern Saskatchewan, from which it had disappeared, and a similar recovery is also underway on the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana. Meanwhile, reintroductions are in progress on Kainai Blood Tribe lands in Alberta and at Badlands National Park and the Bad River Ranches in South Dakota. At the same time, a host of agencies and individuals are engaged in the conservation of other organisms, from wild bees to rattlesnakes to rare prairie orchids. To keep every cog and wheel, the American environmental philosopher Aldo Leopold once wrote, is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering. But simply retaining all the pieces of the ecosystem will not be enough in itself. We also need places where the cogs and wheels can be put back together. To ensure their long-term survival, grassland species need wild grasslands, broad expanses of native prairie that, through a natural process of disturbance and renewal, are able to maintain a living mosaic of habitats for a full complement of birds and animals. Despite all the historic losses, large areas of more or less natural prairie still exist, especially on the rangelands of the northwestern short and mixed grass ecoregions in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, and Nebraska. To this day, there are at least 10 regional landscapes on the northern plains that are dominated as far as the eye can see by expanses of native prairie. Several of these areas encompass as much as 4,600 square miles, 12,000 square kilometers, larger than either Jasper or Yellowstone national parks, making them of real significance for conservation. See Map 14, Potential Areas for Large Landscape Conservation on the Great Plains. Unfortunately, virtually none of this landscape has been formally protected by law. In fact, across the Great Plains as a whole, only about 1% of the countryside has been set aside in parks or conservation reserves, less than in any other biome in North America. See Map 15, National and State Provincial Parks on the Great Plains. The surviving expanses of native prairie are hard-working landscapes that today, as in the past, provide the basis for Western cattle production. But ranches are not wildlife refuges, and over the years, ranchers have made it clear that varmints like prairie dogs, wolves, and wild bison won't find a warm welcome here. At the same time, ranching has placed a value on both wild prairie as grazing land and on the aesthetics of broad horizons. For many ranchers, maintaining large expanses of native pasture in productive condition has been a labor of love, as well as an act of economic self-interest. It is a tribute to their efforts that several significant conservation projects, including Grasslands National Park and Old Man on His Back Conservation Area in Saskatchewan, and the Tallgrass Prairie National Preserves in Oklahoma and Kansas, have been established on lands that were previously managed as commercial ranches.
Ranching not only has the advantage of preventing the prairie from being plowed up, it also helps to keep it from becoming fragmented. Anything that takes a bite out of the natural grassland, whether it be a tame pasture, a pricey ranchette, or an oil field with its network of service roads, breaks up the landscapes and subtly alters its ecological function. A study conducted in Colorado showed that the subdivision of ranch land into acreages led to the displacement of grassland birds, such as lark buntings and meadowlarks, and their replacement with robins, magpies, and other common or garden species. The pattern was the same for carnivores, with coyotes and bobcats ceding their role as predators to domestic pets. Most worrying of all was the discovery that these cut-up tracts of prairie were much more susceptible than working ranch lands to the intrusions by a long list of invasive plants, including introduced species such as smooth brome, crested wheatgrass, leafy spurge, and dozens of others. Given an inch of bare ground, these aggressive weeds will literally take a mile, eventually overwhelming and choking out the natural vegetation. The more lines of disturbance are scratched across the country, the more access these invaders gain, and the more quickly the native prairie is forced to give way.
So I'll just quickly interject here. These are the maps that were referred to in the readings. I think that, I didn't find them extremely helpful other than just showing, this is a huge expanse. And the fact is that there's these seeds of conservation happening, as you can see in the second map, all across it. And so I think that, you know, there's potential to expand and connect some of that. And then if you go down to the next page, Emily, there's another case study that I just wanted to point out at this point. I've been finding in my research, and Kavi, let me know what you're finding too, but a lot of groups are really trying to think big on the grasslands and the prairies in terms of purchasing land that people actually want to sell and trying to connect it up. The American Prairie Reserve is one such effort. I believe, can you go down just a little more, Emily? I think it was like 3.8 million acres, 3.2 million acre wildlife sanctuary they want to make in northeastern Montana. And, you know, I don't know on the ground how this, was that? Oh, I don't know on the ground how this is actually playing out, but there are these efforts where people are trying to put together huge amounts of land, take out the fences, and reintroduce the bison. And this one is one of the larger efforts that you can see is happening around the Missouri. So it's just interesting because there's a lot of, like we've learned, rural depopulation. So there's land that actually wants to be sold, and so there's an opportunity there, but I don't, you know, I'm sure there's complexities to all of this that I haven't encountered because I'm not part of the actual work, but I just wanted to point out that this is happening on the ground today. And below you can see a little bit about this one, privately funded nonprofit organization. And if you'll go down a little more, American Prairie Reserve. Oh, yeah, thank you. But the reserve is facing fierce opposition by many locals because to build it, the organization is slowly purchasing ranches from willing sellers. I remember them emphasizing that. Phasing out the cows and replacing them with wild bison. Those private properties are then stitched together with vast tracts of neighboring public lands to create one giant rewilded prairie. The organization has purchased close to 30 properties so far, but it needs at least 50 more. So it's just interesting to know that this is going on. And that's my interjection, and now I'll be quiet again. We can keep going down to the next section.
Cowboy conservation. If there were legal protection for endangered societies as well as species, the ranching communities of the Western Plains would surely top the list. In one struggling town after another, school enrollments are declining, storefronts are boarded up, and the ranchers who meet on Coffee Row are no longer young. A uniquely Western way of life is at risk of blinking out. In the past, conservationists and ranchers have often had the testy relationship, but tempers have mellowed with time, and the old adversaries are increasingly able to find common ground in their concern for the future. Ranchers want to earn a living from ranching, and conservationists want them to succeed. As part of a strengthened and diversified nature-based economy. In a report entitled New Directions for the Prairie Economy, Connecting Conservation and Rural Development in the Northern Great Plains, published in 2009, the World Wildlife Fund presented a 12-point plan for fostering nature-based economic development in ways that also support the goals of biodiversity conservation. Key recommendations included expanding ranch-based ecotourism, notably hunting, to reward landowners who conserve biodiversity, developing markets for biodiversity-friendly beef and other grassland products, enlarging ecological reserves to encompass at least 10% of the northern plains, expanding support for indigenous peoples, ecological and cultural aspirations, securing adequate funding for existing conservation programs, and offering compensation to ranchers for the ecological services they provide, such as protecting watersheds, preventing soil erosion, and sequestering carbon. Growing conservation. The importance of protecting the surviving horizons of native grassland can scarcely be overstated. As long as there is grassland on the land, there is hope for recovery. But protecting the best of what's left cannot be the only priority. To borrow again from Aldo Leopold, relegating wild prairie to the western rangelands is like relegating happiness to heaven. One may never get there to enjoy it. Fortunately, there are more immediate pleasures. The regions that have been altered by farming still shimmer with life. Roadsides are heady with wild roses. Geese explode out of the farmers' fields. Pretty little deer mice patter around barns and granaries. Although Farmlab is not a prairie, it nonetheless provides habitat for many species of native animals and plants. Sometimes these farmyard populations are all that is left, remnants of a world that has otherwise vanished.
Take the case of the tall grass prairie. Apart from a relatively small enclave in the Flint Hills and Osage Plains of Kansas and Oklahoma, where the soil is too rocky to till, this ecoregion has been almost 100% converted to crop production. We're talking about the row after row after rowness of the Corn Belt. All that remains of the natural vegetation are small, isolated patches that somehow escaped the plow, leaving a tantalizing glimpse of a country alight with butterflies and bright with flowers. Although some of these fragments are smaller than backyard gardens, each one demands attention and care as a unique example of a critically imperiled ecosystem. Because of local variations in growing conditions and through pure chance, no two patches have exactly the same species in the same proportions. Through the combined initiatives of national and local organizations, many of these prairie remnants are now protected by law and are intensively managed to prevent the incursion of woody invasives and other takeover artists. Similar rescue efforts have also begun in the mixed grass ecoregions. These islands of survival provide critical habitat for many species at risk. The dickcissel, the regal fritillary butterfly, the ornate box turtle, the prairie rattlesnake, and on and on. But alas, these small, isolated populations remain under constant threat. If some misfortune befalls them, whether through pesticide drift, excess predation, or prolonged drought, there are no neighboring populations to move in and replace them, with the result that a single disastrous season could wipe them out. The only possible solution is, wherever possible, to create blocks of habitat large enough to support viable populations or to provide corridors between the existing fragments. Hence the current lively interest in prairie restoration. Going against the historical trend of plowing prairie up, conservation-minded people have begun to replant it. This has called for innovation in both equipment and techniques and has sparked the development of a native seed industry. Creating new prairie is tricky, expensive, and in terms of species richness, never a complete success, but it is an inspiring step in the right direction. The cause of prairie restoration has found some unexpected advocates, among them the Iowa Department of Transportation. Iowa is a farming country taken to the extreme, with only scant vestiges of native prairie. What the state does have, however, is a go-anywhere grid of roads, all of which have vegetated verges. Taken together, these strips add up to about 500,000 acres, roughly 200,000 hectares, of unproductive land that requires mowing, spraying, and other regular maintenance. In an attempt to reduce costs in the late 1980s, the transport
just transportation and then go to in one case. I think we
Okay.
missed something.
In one case, for example, researchers found 5 times as many butterflies, representing twice as many species in the high quality restorations as in comparable grassy or weedy ditches. This success has inspired the Iowa Transportation Commission to pump millions of dollars into the Living Roadway Trust Fund, making the state a leader in what it calls ecological transportation. The thought that corridors of prairie might one day run along roads and highways across the Great Plains is cheerful to contemplate. But even if it eventually happens, it will not be enough. Life cannot be relegated to the margins. In areas devoted to farming, the working landscape is an ecoregion all its own, where there is a great deal more at stake than crop production. Admittedly, cultivated land provides less than ideal habitat for many organisms, notably for those that cannot cope with chronic disruption. Yet for species that have been able to make the transition to the agro-ecosystem, farmland is home, and what happens there is critical to their survival.
Managing for wildness. All of these complexities of rangeland and farmland, easements and frameworks, opportunities and options can be summed up in 2 basic concepts. They are the mantras of prairie conservation. The first is to protect and enhance wild prairie wherever it still exists, whether as large connected landscapes or where there are no alternatives left, as one-of-a-kind fragments. The second, often overlapping priority is to manage the working landscape for wildness so that it not only serves the interests of people, but also supports a diversity of swimming, flying, walking, and crawling forms of life. Achieving these goals will not be easy. Failing to achieve them will mean a continuing downward trend for many of the prairie's unique ecoregions and species. These priorities take on an even greater urgency in the context of climate change. The grasslands as we know them emerged thousands of years ago at the end of a 3 million year long ordeal of glaciation. The difference between the desolation of the Ice Age and the birth of the prairies was a natural warming trend that caused the average global temperatures to rise about 9 degrees Fahrenheit or 5 degrees Celsius. Now we are headed toward a perturbation of similar magnitude, but one that we have caused ourselves. The problem, as we all know, is the thick insulating blanket of carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and other industrial emissions that envelops the earth and prevents heat from radiating away from the surface. Trapped inside this hot box, the planet has already experienced a global temperature rise of more than 1 degree Celsius over pre-industrial conditions, and the Great Plains are running ahead of the trend.
Data from the Environment and Climate Change Canada documents warming on the Canadian prairies of about 3.4 degrees Fahrenheit or 1.9 degrees Celsius in less than a human lifetime from 1948 to 2016, with more to come. Any reasonably long-lived person born on the northern plains in the 2020s can expect to see the mercury climb by an additional 3.4 degrees Fahrenheit, 1.9 degrees Celsius, even if emissions are capped. The increase will ramp up to 11.7 degrees Fahrenheit, 6.5 degrees Celsius if emissions continue to grow unabated. Meanwhile, precipitation is expected to increase in many parts of the region, with less snow but more spring and summer downpours and more damaging storms. Projections for the southern plains call for cruelly extended heat waves and increasingly severe droughts, interspersed with devastating floods. The earth itself is spiking a fever, and our collective response to date has been to wring our hands. In this crisis, the principles of prairie conservation offer us a way forward, beyond worry and self-doubt. By protecting natural grasslands and rewilding the working landscape, we enhance the ability of nature to save us from ourselves, as the land regains its capacity to regulate itself. At the same time, we find ourselves on a path towards restoration and health for the prairie and all its creatures, including our own children and grandchildren. We cannot hold back the future, but we can shape the course of events by engaging fully, in no small part, on our ability to ensure the well-being right now. This is sometimes referred to as the strategy of no regrets, because the work is worth doing no matter what happens next. By expressing our love for the prairies in action, we take a stand against despair and hold hands with all our relations, now and in the future. One more short reading. I know it's a little bit long tonight, but it's worth it.
Buffalo Nation, Environmental Benefits of American Bison and Efforts to Restore Them to the Great Plains. Winona LaDuke. For Native America, the bison is the elder brother and teacher. For the Great Plains, may be the salvation. In February 1999, Rosalie Little Thunder and Joseph Chasing Horse led some 40 Native people on Tatanka Oyate Mani, the Walk for the Buffalo Nation, from South Dakota's Black Hills to the stone archway of Yellowstone's northern entrance. It was there that Yanktonai Lakota Gary Silk danced for the buffalo as Horace Axtell, a descendant of Nez Perce Chief Joseph, prayed and sang with his sons, their clear voices resonating to the mountains. Through sleet, wind, and blizzards, Little Thunder and the other Tatanka Oyate Mani participants walked a 507-mile spiritual journey along seemingly endless yellow lines through the northern plains, jostled by barreling semi-trailers, and prayed for the restoration of the Buffalo Nation. To Native America, the buffalo is the elder brother, the teacher. In Lakota culture, it is said that before you kill a buffalo, you must perform the buffalo kill ceremony. You must offer prayers and talk to the animal spirit. Then, and only then, will the buffalo surrender itself. Only then can you kill the buffalo.
The first people were the buffalo people, our ancestors, which came from the Black Hills, the heart of everything that is, explains Chief all of the Lakotas, most revered holy man. I humbly ask all to respect our way of life. Thus, if there is no buffalo, then life as we know it will cease to exist. There is a similar teaching in my own Anishinaabe. During ceremonies, an elder voice will rise as the drum quiets. The buffalo gave their lives so we might live. She will say, now it is our turn to speak for the buffalo, to stand for our relatives. The death of the buffalo has vast implications for native ecosystems as well as native peoples. Buffalo determine landscapes. For thousands of years, the Great Plains, the largest single ecosystem in America, was maintained by the buffalo. By their sheer numbers, weight, and behavior, they cultivated the prairie, that their thundering hooves danced on the earth moved by the millions.
Their steps resounded in the vast underground water system, the Ogallala Aquifer, stimulating the fight to bring back its health and seeding the prairies. And their destruction set in motion the ecological and economic crisis that now afflicts the region. In the mid-19th century, 50 million bison ranged the prairie. There were then more than 250 types of grass, along with profusions of prairie dogs, purple cornflower, prairie turnips, mushrooms, and a host of other species listed today as endangered or protected. This natural balance has shifted considerably, and biological diversity has plummeted. Those 50 million buffalo have been replaced by farms and 45 million cattle. Due to massive cultivation and irrigation, the Great Plains topsoil is eroding and groundwater is dwindling. The prairies are teeming with pumps, irrigation systems, combines, and toxic chemicals. Much of the original ecosystem has been destroyed, and what remains is in a precarious state. No other biome on the continent has suffered so much loss. The Great Plains region spans 40% of the United States, but holds just a fraction of its population. Roughly 1 in 4 counties are in economic or demographic decline, as well as social distress, and have reverted to what is technically called, quote, frontier status, with fewer than 2 residents per square mile. The historian Frederick Jackson Turner declared the frontier closed in 1893, but he may have been a bit premature. The frontier, as determined by population, is in a permanent state of flux. In North Dakota, the frontier zone shrank to 21% in 1920, but over the last 50 years has stretched again to cover 3/5 of the state. In 1990, delinquency rates for holders of the Farm Home Administration loans hit 26% in North Dakota and 42% in South Dakota and 28% in Nebraska. Rates for production loans exceeded 40% in all 3 states. Beyond these chronic troubles, bad years can bring drought, floods, and wheat scab. Little wonder farmers are calling it quits. Yet an ironic reversal of history is taking place here. While non-Indians, farmers, and otherwise are fleeing the rural areas, native populations are increasing. Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Oklahoma all suffered net population losses between 1985 and 1990. Yet many Indian reservations populations have doubled during the past 2 decades. These new demographics offer hope. What we are witnessing may be nothing less than the return of the Indian and the buffalo, the ebb of the frontier, and in its own way, a regional reversal of manifest destiny. In the minds and hearts of the buffalo peoples, the prairie are where the buffalo are meant to be, the place where the wind calls their names. Buffalo are the animals of the past, yes, but they are also animals of the future. You know, I feel like this is a good place to stop, possibly, unless you protest. I feel my readings were a little long tonight.
I was wondering about the story of the
white cloud. Yeah, of the white calf. Go down to the very bottom, Emily, and let's take a look, and we'll watch the video as our ending piece. I feel like it's the right thing to do, instead of reading those last couple pages. And I again apologize. This was also from an archival book. Look at that. Look at that white buffalo bull. For it was the white buffalo cow woman who in the beginning brought to us our most sacred pipe, and from that time we have been relatives with the four-leggeds and all that moves. Tatanka, the buffalo, is the closest four-legged relative that we have, and they live as people, as we do. Black Elk, the Sacred Pipe, 1953. The story of the white buffalo woman's coming to the Lakota is a powerful legend on many levels. It tells of the origin of many Lakota traditions and of the peoples finding their place in the order of the world. The legend also tells of the origin of the calumet, the ceremonial pipe that remains the Lakota's most sacred heirloom, as John Fire Lame Deer wrote in Lame Deer Seeker of Visions. Nothing of importance, good or bad, takes place among us without the pipe. Finally, the story is a prophecy, telling of the sacred white buffalo that will come one day to unite all races to live together in harmony. So let's listen to the chief as our final word, and then hopefully we have a few moments to discuss too. I'm sorry my readings were a bit long, but it's so hard to cut them down. So Emily will play our chief.
Chief Arvo Looking Horse from Lakota Sioux Nation, and we're here on my reservation, the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota. This is where the bundle has been for the last 100 years. I'm the keeper of the sacred pipe, 19th generation keeper of the sacred pipe. I was 12 years old when I received that bundle. We have a message for the world. We have many prophecies that goes with the white animals showing their sacred color, because that's the only way they can speak to us. When he told me that someday this white buffalo calf would stand upon the earth, since 1994, almost every year a white buffalo calf stood upon the earth. And she told the people that this is a blessing, but it's a warning. She said when the white animals showed their sacred color, there's going to be some great changes. Earth changes, climate changes, and we're in those changes. And the story of the bundle was that during that time there was no buffalo. All the animals disappeared, all the buffalo disappeared. And the people says a great teaching has come among the people when they disrespect the way of life. And the creator, Wakantanka, said, told the people, you're going to live a way of life and follow the buffalo and respect a way of life. But because that we're human beings, that the people they abused that life, a way of life, and that's when all the animals and the buffalo disappeared. So the story is that there was 2 scouts, and they were looking for animals or buffalo, mainly buffalo at the time. And then when they're sitting on top of the hill, they saw from the far away distant a person coming, and this person came upon them was a woman with long black hair and buckskin dress and carrying a bundle, buffalo robe. And she came to them and said, I know what both of your thinking. One is good thoughts and one with the bad thoughts. She told the one with the bad thoughts, come to me. And when he approached her, a cloud enveloped him, the clouds lifted, he was in skeleton. His kola, his friend, was looking at him, and he was in shock to see that. And she said, tomorrow I will bring this bundle to the people. Go prepare. So he went back and told what happened. And the next day she brought the bundle, the sacred pipe. And she was singing as she came to the people, and she laid a bundle down. She opened this buffalo robe, and there's a red stone and a stem. And she put it together, and then she started singing the 4 Direction song. To the west, then she sang to the grandfathers to the north, east, south, the Great Spirit and Mother Earth. And then she put tobacco in there every time. And she left that pipe was put together and said, Cha Oompa. Cha is wood and Oompa is smoke. She put it to the first keeper, would be his lips, and said, Oompa, smoke. And said through this Chanupa, there's 7 ceremonies. And then she told him more about the Chanupa, then she left. When she left, she went to the west, and she went so far, and she rolled over and she stood up, and she became a young black buffalo. The second was a red one. The third one is a yellow one. And the fourth one is a white one. So she went over the hill as a white buffalo calf. So the people watching her, they said that we would call her the white buffalo calf woman. And the story is that next time she told the people, next time she returns, she would stand on the earth as a white buffalo calf. Like this white buffalo calf. And what happened was, this story has been so many generations that, I never, when he told me that someday this white buffalo calf would stand upon the earth, not my generation, but since 1994, almost every year a white buffalo calf stood upon the earth. And she told the people that this is a blessing, but it's a warning. And said when the white animal showed in the sacred color, there's going to be some great changes. Earth changes, climate changes. And what is happening in the world today with global warming, and we can't like me or a group of people, a handful of people can't really No, it's got to be global. That's why when we talk about global warming, or we talk about it's got to be a spiritual unity in the world today, where people, if we're going to, these prophecies are there, the white buffalo, white animals, and the eagle and the condor, and there's so many prophecies, even like in the Bible, or there are different people talk about different things about these prophecies during this time right now. But it's going to take all people to really come together, with the heart, with the mind, with good heart and good mind. Because in the past, it seemed like my way is the only way, and we're not. For me, I can't say no. I want everybody to be pick up a pipe. No, we're not. I'm not here to speak about that. No, I'm pushing that responsibility to the people in general, because we all love our kids, and we all have the gift of compassion and the gift of responsibility, equal responsibility. In order for this earth to survive, it's got to be peace and harmony. That's that balance that we have to create. Right now, it's not happening. So that's a message that I strongly have an input on, is that we are going to create this. We're going to make history, and this new millennium, we're going to make a change, and for the benefit for our children, because our children are beautiful, our grandchildren are beautiful, but we as leaders today, we need to connect, and we need to help each other. There's no, in that circle, there's no one person higher than the other. We need to, doesn't matter what part of the world that you're in, we're all being affected, globally. And that's why I really try to walk in prayer, to help people understand that what we're up against is it's got to be a spiritual unity.
Chief had the last word. I'm sorry, you guys, that went a little long tonight, but it was worth hearing Chief. He speaks with slow intention. Every video, I looked up lots of videos of the Chief, and every video, it's the same way. Like, yeah, so that's that. And I do have guiding questions, and I would just love to hear reflections and thoughts about this whole series. Wow, what a journey. It's been an emotional journey. It's been a spiritual journey. And I feel connected with this continent in a way that I didn't before. So I'm really thankful for the experience. Some of my guiding questions for tonight. The first one, just kind of thinking about what the Chief said. He talked about the prophecies and how there's many, many prophecies that speak of this time as both a time of big challenge and big change. And I was just thinking about prophecies in general and the role they play in knowledge and culture. And I was just wondering if any of you had reflections on that. And then kind of going back into some of the readings, a couple of things that stood out for me. There was a point in one of the readings where they talked about the prairie, kind of a death by 1,000 cuts. And I was thinking, can we restore with 1,000 mendings? Like, is it enough? What is the role of scale and connectivity in the health of our planet? If there's this slow decline, and then there's also acts of resistance. I don't know, just how does that balance out, and what is the role of scale and connectivity in the health of our planet, and how do we think about that? And then lastly, I just was wondering, well, one more I had is, what do you think about the potential for coalitions between ranchers, conservationists, and indigenous peoples? There was a part about cowboy conservation and things like that. And I get interested when usual adversaries are rethought or reimagined as allies. And I believe that this is happening successfully. And I was wondering if anyone here has seen examples of that on the ground. And then last, is there any takeaways from the series that really stuck in your mind? What maybe some deeper lessons that might be embedded in the stories that we have heard from the Great Plains and the indigenous activists and the Great Bison herds? And I know that's a lot. I'll put it in the chat, and then just love to hear basically any reflections.
Kelly, maybe you went over this before, but the first part of the reading, what is the source of that?
The first part is Prairie and Natural History, and it is more from, it's from a woman who is a biologist and ecologist who lives on the prairies. So it has a different kind of approach, I think, but she does a good job of going over kind of the diversity of it and the different organisms and just the large scale thinking. So.
Sorry, what's the title? You said Prairie and
A Natural History.
Prairie or Natural History. Oh, that's right. And who's the author?
Candace Savage.
Oh, okay. I think you covered it previously. Yeah.
I can talk about the meaning of prophecy in a way, because it can shift the future and change perception, and then can imagine can be so powerful that sometimes you wish that you hadn't gone to that psychic, or not that I go to psychics all the time, but in general those kinds of things, because it can really shift reality. And prophecy, like the one looking, the person who was just speaking, I'm sorry, whose name I've got the memory for his name, I'm sorry. And all these similar prophecies, they are good because they're from a different dimensional space, if you want to call it that, or from a place that's grounded and about healing, and about healing of all things, instead of just a way of, it's a collective healing, it's a collective thing. And so that I think they're good guides, and they're good like stars to follow in a way. Yeah.
I was just gonna add that a prophecy by definition is a message that's been communicated to a person by a supernatural entity. So I think part of my practice, at least, has been about learning to be open to the web of life in all its forms. And I do think that I've experienced something of prophecy in that journey of being near the prairies and by the prairies. Just through deep immersion in landscape, I can often feel prophecy, if that like awareness of bigger than us, bigger than our cognitive state, is part of the practice of being open to things. Then I feel that whenever I'm connected to big picture thinking, that I'm receiving prophecy that is beyond the wisdom pool of what we normally consider kind of pedagogy in at least academic thinking. And so I think it's really connected to your other question, Kelly, about mending by 1,000 small moves, you know, because in that same regard, tending to a seed is the same as master planning a city, because it can put me in touch with the true wonder of the emergence of living things. And I connect the buffalo with that prairie and seed because they are the pollinators of the prairie. Their movements through those vast landscapes pollinated the seeds of those prairie grasses. So yeah, I think these are really wonderful questions to be to leaving us with as we close this unit. To be aware that there's magic all around us all the time, and we can call that prophecy, but I think it comes to us when we're open and seeking openness of mind and openness of spirit. I find that I'm aware of prophecy, even though I may not know where it's from or what its message is. I know it through the openness I feel in my heart and mind.
Well, just to add to that, like I've been doing this, and every stitch I've done is a prayer to return the plants and the buffalo and everything. And I think that as artists, every time you do something, it's quite often a prophecy, because so much stuff just comes true. What you make, if you make films, they can come true like 5 years or 20 years down the line. And if you do everything, if you try to maintain a mindful and healing, I'm preaching to the choir here, but if you do that mindset while you're doing it, then you can actually bend reality, and that is, I think, a prophetic and healing and generous act, and it's imagined on every level, and it does reach this reality, and I've seen it time and again.
Oh, Susan, we can't hear you. I can tell you're speaking. No. Oh. No. Darn, I want to hear what you're saying. Yeah, get rid of those earphones. No.
Write it in the chat bar and we'll read it out loud.
Yeah, exactly. We'll try to embody the spirit.
And it worked earlier when you were just introducing yourself, so whatever setup you had then, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'll read it for Mish. Okay. Mm-hmm. I'd like to read Misha's piece.
Good.
My takeaway, hope for the bison, but fear and anger as an entire living systems are disappearing. The bison is such an emblematic figure, yet the answer to collapsing ecological systems must be addressed through radical and fundamental changes, specifically policies, and revolution, if need be. The bison cannot truly be saved if it's a whole habitat, including microorganisms living below the prairie grasses, and all others are not being remediated, protected, rehabilitated.
Susan's question was interested in talking more about the indigenous and the ranchers. Do they get along? I can answer for my experience in the Owens Valley with the ranchers and the Paiute Shoshone tribes. And that is that there's a lot that they share in common and have learned to discuss that commonality. And that specifically, both the ranchers and the Paiute have private water rights from the state of California, which are constantly being challenged by the extreme environmental conditions that we're living through. So the common challenge is the negotiation with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. So when it comes to advocacy around stewardship of water rights, a lot of the ranchers that we've worked with and a lot of the Paiute Shoshone people that we have worked with support each other and come to each other's meetings. Would you say that's true? Sure. And also share interest and respect for the labor force that their heritage has been built on, which are the equines. So the mules and the horses that work that landscape have become deeply felt, empathic relationships with both the Paiute Shoshone people that we've worked with and the tribal people. In fact, when Metabolic Studio performed a walk of our own, 100 mules walking the LA Aqueduct, we know from the Paiute elder Kathy Bancroft that the very last day her father was alive, he wanted to be driven to the Alabama hills to watch the buffalo pass by. I mean, the mules pass by. And that because he grew up on mules in the Owens Valley, and that love for the equines in that landscape was the last thing he wanted to see on planet Earth. So that's pretty deep, you know, deep knowledge, but there's also deep injury. So I don't know if I could say that I know that they get along, but I do know that I have experienced their deep sympathies for one another in these areas of common interest.
And mutual respect.
And mutual respect.
And the rodeo is like what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's true too. And that's going on this weekend in Bishop. It's their annual Mule Days, and there will be plenty of people from both the tribal community and the rancher community having a really good time together. So those are shared experiences that are sometimes not seen by those of us living in cities, you know, that you know, we like to think about how the mythic cowboy, which never really existed anyway, is a production of Hollywood, and the mythic Native American that is also mostly a production of Hollywood, fought each other in romanticized battles, and the real battles and the real treacheries were and are many, many more that have never been really talked about in media. But this whole idea of the injuries by 1,000 cuts is much more, you know, much more probably true. And again, as a non-native American, I don't know what other people feel for each other, but through the practice of Metabolic Studio, we've certainly had years of opportunity to observe mutual respect and shared values for the stewardship of the landscape and fighting the common enemy, which is the colonization of water and the notion that one place should be delivered water at the expense of another.
I just wanted to add to that too, where I live in Baja California. I think there's a really strong crossover there between ranchers and people that are living on the reservation. The horses have this ability to not only just kind of blur this sort of lines, if there are between them, but I'm finding that even in the circles that I'm working with here, restoring native plants and grasses and all of that, somehow that intersection also opens this discourse about lots of other things. It's kind of like this middle place where it's easy to begin conversations. It always happens like in gatherings at the reservation, or oftentimes there's obviously rodeos here where both peoples are intertwined in those events. So, but I see that kind of specifically the horses, because we're a big horse culture here. That opens up conversations for lots of other things too.
I think that the central grasslands is a different bioregion than, Inyo County or California in general, actually. And I think these readings, and maybe the series as a whole, but I haven't been here the whole time, are kind of sidestepping the issue of the fundamental approach to land being extractionist. Certainly the overriding imprint on the land, if you drive through Minnesota, Iowa, Kansas, is really extractionist. It's production, and the power and bureaucratic structures of the United States government is tied into that vision of the land. And you don't even need 1,000 cuts. You've got one big giant, agency, the Department of Agriculture, with its massive resources at many levels, bureaucratic and throughout the nation, propping up the system. And for some reason, the entire reading doesn't mention the fundamental economic driver of this, which is not only the mentality of extractionism and erasure, but commodity subsidies, which drives the way the landscape looks. And there are programs like the Conservation Reserve Program, which pays farmers for periods of 10 to 15 years to keep lands out of production. But even when they do, prairie restoration is not even mentioned in the USDA. I work there. And not only that, it's with the aim of sort of reviving productivity that was lost because of mechanized extraction. And it's not anything to do with this other whole world that we read about, which Chief, is it Whitehorse? I'm sorry, I forgot his name too. Talks about, where he involves the human being and the relationship to land. The land is completely objectified. There's no relationship to the land other than to use it to take. So I think there's a fundamental, just the lack of just even mentioning that it's locked into an economic system that's locked into global trade, that's locked into even non-farming economies, the entire, the military background behind the extractionism in the agricultural industry. It's locked in like that. And so I think there's a real disconnect between the kind of way of thinking of Chief Whitehorse, or the idea of being part of the land and connecting to the land, and the machinery that has set up that system. So I would love to see more of the Conservation Reserve Program. Maybe somebody else knows about it too. Be involved with, be connected to prairie restoration in the spirit that we read about here. Because a lot of it has to do with restoring soil, or preventing sort of nutrient runoff that goes down the Mississippi River and so on. So yeah, it's something to think about. I found it that this whole reading just completely sidestepped the economic argument here, which is central.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just respond briefly because I feel like in previous readings we have touched on that, and I think this week I chose specific readings about the possibilities, so it was kind of curated through that lens. And it's so hard within one session to bring all of it together, and I was trying to kind of end on this feeling of possibility. And but I appreciate that, and there is actually a section of the readings that I didn't include, and maybe now I'm regretting, that talked about kind of the subsidy programs and issues around the economics in the grasslands. And so I think it's fundamental, and I appreciate you bringing that up. And I hope we touched on it in previous sessions enough, but I think that it is a root. It is a root issue that is like the base of things that needs to change.
If you don't confront the honest truth of it, which is that this whole system is set up to extract and not to stitch together, or to even honor, or even to respect the historical land, but to erase it and then take stuff out of it. If you don't confront it, you can't fix it. You're just going to be like points in space. And I mean, yeah, I have been to the Tallgrass Prairie Reserve in Kansas, and it is quite amazing to see the amount of prairie that's lost, and then they're trying to bring back in a little place just a little bit of the tallgrass prairie, which is, it's shocking, really. It's but unless you, I mean, I really think it's important to have an auguring of where we would like to be, and just the prophecy is important. But unless we're realistic about where we are, I'm not sure how to change those major big bureaucracies. And I mean, and the bureaucracies are supporting a world system. I mean, it doesn't just, it's not in the Midwest. The breadbasket of America is a massive global trade operation. The only agency, the NRCS in USDA and the Farm Service Agency are the main agencies that work on conservation reserve, which is to take lands out of production. And it actually does surprise me why they're not more engaged in, why they don't even use the word prairie at all throughout the Midwest. They don't use that word. They just use it as grassland productivity or things like that. So I think it's a major issue.
Speak towards prairie restoration, but I think remaining optimistic that I think there's going to be more collaboration with tribes and indigenous communities with the federal government as we have more new administration changes and things. And I think James mentioned this on our call a couple weeks ago about the transfer of the Bison Range partnership to the Confederated the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. It was a project run by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Montana Fish and Wildlife Parks, and I believe the U.S. Fish and Wildlife too. It's over 18,000 acres of bison range that's been now transferred over to the tribe too. So I think I'm hopeful with with the National Parks Director Chuck Sams and Deb Holland as well, that more communications with tribes and consultation with tribes in terms of working with them on different projects and land back and with bison restoration. That I think is more hopeful. But in terms of prairie restoration, I think you're still absolutely right that the economic drivers for retaining and keeping land, keeping it productive, and subsidies that the Farm Bill continues to give to ranchers and farmers in the Midwest, we continue to kind of degrade the prairie lands, and that's the biggest major barrier to that too. But I'm overall kind of also feeling optimistic that maybe as more folks are having these conversations, especially around prairie restoration and bison, that hopefully tides will shift as well as more population shift to urban centers and the farmlands. Farmers are looking how to exit. As they're aging, if their heirs don't want to continue farming and ranching, and what that'll bring, and maybe donating their land and farms to different conservation easements or leases and things like that, like the American Prairie Project is doing, and things like that. I think it means to, or remains to be seen, like what's going to be happening in the next 30, 50 years, as well as the ranchers and farmers are also aging as well.
Well, we're going to close out this evening with a little bit of vocalization through the silos in the Owens Valley at let Olan pick up from here with Doug's help. And I wanted to thank you again, Kelly, for curating a really wonderful short 6-session series about a really massive glacial time stretch of land that is perhaps given eyes and weight and embodied by the great bison, and it was an ambitious thing to for us to take on and booby trapped in so many ways. And I'm really thankful that Ansu brought up the USDA and that reality that we're living within, because we'll definitely be picking up on that when we start in September with post-human infrastructure. Because I will add, after the USDA comment, that it's important to talk about the insults, a million insults in every dam built on every river that flows across the continent of the United States to produce hydroelectric dams. And just to remind us that the Bureau of So-Called Reclamation and the US Army Corps have 350,000 employees in the largest engineering firm the world has ever known. And that those are things that we need to tackle and will tackle in our next unit of inquiry. So the reason why I wanted to suggest we start by feeling our way into understanding what kind of range existed on this continent for millennia before we started to colonize it, and what that is how we're going to have to rethink all of that, because it's not working. for all kinds of reasons. And that will be our next focus. So thank you, Ansu, for a perfect segue into what will begin soon. And I'll then pass it over to Olan.
Okay, great. Let's just set the audio settings so that there's a chance for beauty in the silo. So go to the little arrow by the microphone icon, go to audio settings, and see in the input level, microphone input, make it be around the middle of the graph, and output the same. And then I'll just describe what we're going to do, and I'll read a short poem that Kelly found by the Oglala Sioux chief Crazy Horse. That's just something of inspiration before we sing. But I wonder first, could everybody just unmute and sing a note with me, just so we know how it'll work for Douglas as he puts it through the silo? You can sing the same note as me or one that goes with it. Right? So the idea is a sense of what has stayed with you, whatever it is, in this reading and discussion tonight, and maybe the whole series. And the idea of unity, not meaning that we're all the same, but that, as somebody described it once, singing together like this is just a river of melodies, and you're just holding inside what it is you feel in this. And so I will read the little poem, and then I'll sing a little melody, and Emily will join me, and everybody else will join me. So
Olan.
here's what?
Olan, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that we got a little bit of a long delay tonight, longer than normal. So just in your crafting of your melody, just know that it's a little windy and some reason it's just about taking twice as long for everything to happen. So it'll be about a 20-second delay as opposed to a 10-second delay.
Yay. The scale continues. The zooming in and out continues. So here's what Crazy Horse said. My friend, they will return again, all over the earth. They are returning again. Ancient teachings of the earth, ancient songs of the earth. They are returning again.
Rather do this.